a bartender leaned in and whispered, "Don't eat that." 5 minutes later, someone at my table couldn't stand. I'm Evelyn Mercer, 63. I spent 3 decades talking teenagers off bad decisions. I thought retirement meant cardamom tea, book club, and calm. Instead, a pumpkin tart tried to rewrite my life. It happened in Portland, Maine. Harbor lights, pianos, celebration, dessert lands. A folded note slides to my water glass. "Don't eat that. Trust me." I don't make a scene. I make a decision. I trade plates with my daughter's fiancé. We toast, we smile, we eat. 1 minute, 2. At 5, his spoon hits the floor. His face goes the wrong color. The room stops pretending to be safe. Sirens, hospital lights, a detective with the steady voice, and a bartender who says, "If your gut whispers and your eyes see, you move." Then the footage. A small lean, a 9-second pause, a glass nudged closer like kindness wearing a costume, and a pattern I should have noticed finally snapping into place. This isn't a story about dessert. It's a story about control, how a stranger's warning, a mother's instinct, and one quiet choice can keep a family alive. Rewind with me to the start, to the harbor, the piano, the celebration, and the moment a plate arrived with a question mark made of chocolate. We were at the Galleon on a Friday in late October. It's built like an old ship, wood beams, brass rail, windows looking out over the harbor as if the room itself wants to lean toward the tide. The dining room was the warm kind of noisy, clinking, laughing, the sound of a pianist in the corner rolling out autumn leaves like he was trying to make time feel kind. It was my retirement dinner. After 29 years as a guidance counselor, I'd finally stacked my student files in neat cardboard boxes and turned in my key card. Lena insisted on the celebration because she's the kind of woman who believes milestones deserve soup and speeches. She sat to my right, all big feelings and cleverness and a ponytail she swears is temporary, but has been with her since she was 14. Across from me sat Caleb, who was 32, good-looking in a Pinterest way, and always knows what to do with a linen napkin. My sister June sat to his left, wearing the scar I got her in Vermont, rewinding old jokes with me like we were picking berries from a bush we planted decades ago. We ate grilled salmon with lemon and dill and a side of roasted fennel. I made my usual fennel confession. I love fennel, as if the server might revoke my New England credentials. June rolled her eyes like she has a lifetime pass to my habits. Caleb wanted to capture a candid of me laughing, then gave up and asked me to laugh on purpose. Lena told him, "My mother doesn't perform, she just does." The server cleared our plates. The pianist sailed through something that wasn't quite jazz. The room smelled like butter and tide water and the last good fire of the season. Dessert arrived with ceremony. Pumpkin tart, maple cream, and a sprinkle of crushed nuts that glinted under the lights. The plate set in front of me had a tiny chocolate curl that looked like a question mark. That's when the bartender stepped from behind the walnut counter. He wasn't showy about it. He just moved with that easy speed of people who know how to carry urgency without spilling it. He set down a folded slip of paper by my water glass as if he were simply straightening the table. His shoulder grazed the edge of my world, and he said, low enough that it felt like a private weather report, "Don't eat that."
He didn't wait for me to answer. He didn't make a face. He moved away and wiped a non-existent ring from the bar. I picked up the note under the table like it might bruise from too much light. 4 words, written in a block hand. "Don't eat that. Trust me." For a heartbeat, my brain did the thing it does when it's trying to keep you safe and silly at the same time. Maybe someone ordered wrong. Maybe there's gluten. June is celiac. The kitchen could have mixed up the plates. Maybe it's a prank, though it didn't feel like one because pranks wear grins and this wore the opposite. "Everything okay, Mom?" Lena asked, because daughters are translators for the expressions their mothers make without knowing. "Fine," I lied. and I heard the lie sit there, foolish and cold. I excused myself for the restroom because a stall is a good place to try to hear your own voice over the wind. I read the note again under the fluorescent light that makes all truths look unflattering. I thought about calling the bartender over, but what would we say? "Hi, did you mean to save my life?" And what if he was wrong? What if I shoved a perfectly innocent plate away and looked ridiculous and everyone rolled their eyes at the dramatic old counselor who sees danger in salad? When I came back to the table, the pumpkin tart looked benign, which somehow made it worse. Good things look so safe right up until they don't. "Want to share?" Caleb asked, eyes bright, fork at the ready, every part of him designed to smooth a room. That was his specialty, the smoothing. He ironed jokes when they wrinkled, adjusted chairs that didn't need adjusting, offered to fill your water because you might not even know you were thirsty. "Actually," I said, and I felt my voice step out onto unsteady ice, "would you trade with me? I'm curious about yours." I shrugged, like it was whimsy, like the crust on his slice had a superior flake visible only to me. I didn't look at Lena. I didn't look at June. I let the note burn a small circle in my pocket. Caleb smiled. "Sure thing," he said, sliding plates with a little flourish. He reached for my water and moved it closer, almost tender, like he always did. The pianist paused between songs. The harbor exhaled. We raised our forks and congratulated me on surviving 3 decades of teenagers. We ate our desserts. Here is the arithmetic of fear. 1 minute, then another, and the mind starts to time them like contractions, waiting for the shape of the pain. At a little before minute 5, Caleb pressed his fingers to his lips as if he were stifling a yawn. That would have been nothing. The bead of sweat at his hairline would have been nothing too because the restaurant was warm and we were in sweaters, and he runs hot. But the way his hand trembled and knocked his spoon to the floor, the way his pupils didn't know where to land, and the way his body seemed to realize something all at once, that was not nothing. "Hey," Lena said, already halfway out of her chair. She is the kind of person who moves toward the problem. "Hey, Caleb, babe?" His face went a shade I have only seen on people who are not okay. His words arrived in fragments and then didn't arrive at all. He tried to stand and couldn't decide whether the floor was closer than it looked. I looked at the bartender. He was already moving. He spoke to a manager with that quiet speed. Someone called 911. A server brought water and a stack of clean napkins because people need something to hold even if it can't hold them back. "Call 911, I said to no one and everyone. Old habits. Guidance counselors end up commanding rooms even when they don't mean to. By the time the paramedics rushed in, the room had rearranged itself around the emergency. The pianist stopped playing. A couple at a nearby table stood in that helpless way people stand when the world tilts. Lena kept her hand on Caleb's shoulder and kept her voice steady, which is a magic trick all its own. The bartender met my eyes for exactly a second and nodded. It felt like somebody had passed me a baton I didn't know I was carrying. The paramedics lifted Caleb onto a gurney with practiced compassion. He looked small, which is one of the ways fear punishes us. It shrinks people we love. We rode with him to Maine Medical Center. The siren sounded like a blade in the night. The ambulance smelt like plastic and purpose. Lena prayed out loud and then apologized for praying out loud, as if there's a polite volume for begging the universe to be merciful. I pressed my palm flat on my thigh to quiet the shaking, folded the note inside my fist, and kept my breathing obedient. The hospital swallowed us the way hospitals do. Automatic doors, bright lights, the whir of machines that have names I've never asked.
Nurses received him like the shoreline receives waves. The doctor who met us had steady hands and a voice that was careful with its promises. "We've got him," he said, which is not a guarantee, but better than the opposite. They whisked him away. We were left with a waiting room and a vending machine and chair fabric that could survive anything. June bought a water because buying water is a way to feel like you're doing something. I stared at a poster about hand washing and thought about how the world is a string of instructions designed to keep people alive. An hour later, time folds in waiting rooms. It could have been 2 minutes or a year. A doctor sat across from us in that posture doctors use when they are determined to be clear without being cruel. "He's stable," he said to Lena. "We're running tests to determine what caused the symptoms." "Did he have an allergic reaction?" June asked, because that is what makes sense in a restaurant. "We can't say yet," the doctor said. He looked at me then, maybe because I was staring so hard I was a magnet. "Did anyone ingest anything unusual? New medications, supplements?" I felt the note in my pocket like a hot coin. The words came out of me before I had time to ask if they were true. A bartender slid me a note. It said not to eat my dessert. I traded plates with my future son-in-law. 5 minutes later, he got sick. If it sounded like a story someone tells when they've had too much wine, the doctor didn't let his face show it. He nodded, wrote something down without looking at the paper, as if the act of writing helps thinking be brave. "Thank you for telling me," he said, and left with the energy of someone moving between rooms where consequences are waiting. 2 hours later, a detective introduced herself to us with a badge and a warmth that surprised me. She was maybe late 30s, hair twisted back, suit and boots like she prepared for both a meeting and a snowstorm. "Detective Priya Nair," she said. "I'm sorry to meet you like this." The hospital had called her. She listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it should be. When I handed her the note, she didn't touch it with her fingers. She slid it into a small envelope and labeled it with careful, patient letters. She did not say poison. I did not say it either. Some words become monsters if you open the door for them before you're ready. "I'd like to talk to the restaurant staff. Would you be willing to come with me when we do? Context sometimes helps." "Yes," I said, because I've spent my life telling kids that you can't be passive in the face of your own life. Also because I wanted to look someone in the eye. The bartender, the manager, anyone who could tell me I had not imagined the trimmer in the world. The galleon looked different with chairs turned up and the lights turned down. The dining room at Rest has a holy feeling, like a theater after the play, when the props remember what they just meant. The manager met us and led us to a small office with monitors on the wall that showed different angles of the dining room. Door, bar, floor, an overhead view that made everything look like a dollhouse that forgot it was cute. The bartender was there, in a clean shirt, no apron. Up close, he looked younger than he did behind the bar, even with the lines at the corners of his eyes. Kind lines, earned lines. The manager introduced him as Marcos. He nodded at me in a way that placed us in the same room, but not in the same story yet. "You left the note," I said. "I did," he said, without apology or pride. "What did you see?" Marcos took a breath. He said, "I saw your daughter's fiancé come up to the front server station. He picked up 3 dessert plates. He walked them to your table. He set one in front of you, then put the others down. He reached for your water and moved it closer. That was all normal. Then he turned a little, used his body to block the view from the bar, and he stayed like that for a few seconds longer than people do when they're just rearranging plates. He glanced at the bar cam. It wasn't long. It was long enough that my stomach didn't like it. He looked uncomfortable with his own certainty. He said, "I've been wrong before," he said. "But my mother used to tell me, if your gut whispers and your eyes see, you move." I didn't want to be quiet and right. The manager rolled footage. The camera did that thing it does where it makes truth fuzzy and intention sharp. There we were, June's scarf, Lena's ponytail, my hands. There was Caleb, handsome, even under a ceiling view, arranging desserts with that flourish he brings to everything. And there was the moment Marcos described. The lean, the shoulder hiding the plate, the glance toward the bar, the 9 seconds that wanted to be 6. You don't need high definition to recognize a pause that shouldn't be there. Detective Nair leaned in and frowned and asked the manager to save the file with a copy to go. I watched the screen and felt something that was not shock, because shock is white and loud. This was quieter and colder. It was the sensation of pieces falling into a pattern. You know how you step back from a jigsaw puzzle and all at once see that the parts you'd been jamming together were always meant to live in a different corner? That click? That's what it felt like. Summer afternoons when I felt woozy for no reason. A day in July when I put my keys in the freezer with the peas and laughed it off because menopause and stress and being human. The glossy brochure that arrived in the mail addressed to me that recommended proactive cognitive screening for peace of mind. Caleb had been the one to carry the mail inside that day, humming. He had set the envelope beside the kettle and said, "Might be good to have on hand." August at a picnic, I started a story and halfway through realized I had told it 3 weeks earlier. Lena threw me a look, kind but tight. The look of a daughter trying to decide whether to be worried. Caleb had touched the small of her back then, the gesture ownership uses when it wants to masquerade as support. September on my porch, he had said gently, "We could help you set up a system for bills, just in case. It's smart to plan while everything is straightforward." He said just in case with a tenderness that made it sound like a favor. He offered to bring over tea twice a week because I wasn't hydrating enough. It's hydrating if it helps you not trust your own brain. I pressed my palm flat on the desk in the restaurant office. I looked at Marcos. I said, "Thank you." Those were the only words that made sense. I chose to be the person who says the thing. He nodded and looked like someone trying to accept praise without letting it burn. He said, "I don't like being right about this kind of thing." I said, "Me neither." Back at the hospital, the doctor sat down with a gravity that told us the conversation had changed shape. He said they found evidence of a cardiac-acting substance in Caleb's system. Nothing instructional, no chemistry lecture, just the fact of it and the way facts rearrange rooms. He said he would recover because help came fast and bodies are stubborn. He also said a thing I'll be grateful for a while. You did the right thing. If someone warns you and your gut agrees, you don't worry about looking rude. Detective Nair asked if we'd mind stepping to a quieter room to talk. She had a way of asking that wasn't really asking, which I respect in people who spend their days dealing with other people's chaos. The family room was empty except for a box of tissues and a painting of a boat determined to look cheerful. She took notes with a pen that made a pleasing scratch on paper. She asked if Caleb had talked about my finances lately. I told her about the template packets he printed from the internet and how he had framed them as love. I told her about the generic mailer for cognitive testing and the afternoon fogs that didn't match the nights I slept well. I did not make excuses because I'm old enough to know that excuses are just a different kind of fog. Lena sat very still. She said once, "This can't be what it looks like," and then didn't say it again because she is also old enough to recognize when the world is showing you its teeth. Detective Nair thanked us, said she would talk to Adult Protective Services because patterns like this brush against the edges of things APS sees, and then went to do her job while we tried to remember how to do ours: breathing, drinking water, answering texts from people with good intentions and bad timing.
I slept on June's couch that night because my house suddenly felt like a set someone had dressed to look like my life. It's scary the way memory can be retrofitted to hold new meaning. That teacup you thought was kindness looks different when you hold it at arm's length. That afternoon nap you attributed to retirement feels suspect when you put it next to a plate and a whisper. 2 days later, after Caleb stabilized and could talk without his body interrupting him, Detective Nair interviewed him at the hospital. Lena and I were present because she asked for us to be, and because I wanted to see whether his face cracked or whether it did the other thing. He said he didn't know what anyone was talking about. He said he carried plates and moved a glass, and that was all. He said the spoon fell because hands are clumsy in autumn. He said he got sick because his stomach was off lately, and maybe I had a bug and he caught it from proximity. He said any documents on his computer were just a fiancé trying to help a family be ready because life is not polite about timing. When Lena told him about the footage, the glance, the too long lean, his surprise looked like a person trying on humility at the wrong size. He reached for her hand and said, "Baby, please, I'm the one who got sick." She didn't take his hand. She said, "That's the point." And something in her voice closed. Detective Nair left her card with him and her seriousness with us. She said they would apply for a warrant to search his devices. She said this is the kind of case where intent hides behind folders labeled taxes and photos and other. She said carefully that whatever we might find, we'd move through it together and slowly, because adrenaline makes people sloppy, and she doesn't like sloppy when truth is delicate. The warrant came through the following week. His laptop showed what people think will look reasonable later: drafts of documents labeled just in case, lists of my accounts, not complete, but detailed enough to smell wrong, bookmarks to articles about navigating a parent's cognitive decline, and, less innocently, to threads about persuading skeptical relatives. A spreadsheet where my name appeared on the top line. Text to a contact saved as John, with messages that said nothing explicit and everything implied. Can we meet? Need same small quantity. Soon. No instructions, no labeling of anything. But intention has a scent. The detective and the DA know how to track intention, even when it thinks it's covered its tracks with reasonable words. They didn't arrest him that day. These things aren't television. They don't cut to cuffs and glassy speeches. They watched. They built a case that could stand up in a room where people speak in strategy. Caleb went back to his apartment with his hand in a cast from where an IV had lived and a face that could still look boyish under the wrong light. I didn't call him. He didn't call me. He texted Lena twice. She didn't answer. He left a voicemail that said her name and then silence, as if he had hoped her name would be enough to unlock something that had already been locked. The day they arrested him was overcast and ordinary. He was on his way to the gym. They pulled him aside without spectacle, which I appreciated. I don't like when the worst moments of your life are choreographed. The charges were careful, the way charges are when they're written by people who know what words can be used against justice later. Tampering with food with intent to cause harm, elder exploitation under a statute that admits manipulation isn't always a bruise, and a grab bag of lesser counts that make the structure sound in case the roof leaks. He pled not guilty at the arraignment. The judge's robe made a soft sound when he sat down. Lawyers spoke in that pinched tone they use when they want to sound dignified and end up sounding like positioned furniture. He posted bail with money I did not know he had. He went home to a couch that probably still smelled like the cologne Lena bought him last Christmas. People ask me in the months after how I didn't see it sooner.
I don't punish them for the question because it is a prayer inside a curiosity. Please tell me there is a way to see monsters before they step out of the hall. I tell them the truth I gave to teenagers and now give to myself. Love is loud and fear is a whisper. We are trained in families, in culture, to value the loud things, love, logic, clarity. We call whispers overreactions. We provide synonyms for panic and call them maturity. We hand good women tea and say, "They're there," and the women drink it and call the fog inside their brains a symptom of age. The week after the arrest, Lena and I sat with a therapist who has chairs that don't hurt your back and a tiny fountain that is supposed to sound like peace. The therapist asked us both what we were most afraid to know. Lena said that I chose someone who would hurt my mother on purpose, that I don't know how to pick safe men. I said that my intuition told me the truth and I argued with it because I was embarrassed to make a scene in a restaurant. The therapist nodded like both answers were correct, and neither was the end of the story. Shame isn't a strategy, she said. It's a stall. We learned new sentences in that room. Lena learned to say, I can love a person and also end it when I learn new information. I learned to say, my intuition isn't drama. June came to a session and said, I wish you had told me about the keys in the freezer when it happened, so I could have told you, me too. We cried a little and tried to cry without despair. It is possible, but it takes practice. Marcos came to dinner 2 weeks later. I invited him because it felt wrong to leave the person who said the thing out of the part where we get to eat something that isn't terror. He arrived with a pie from a place in South Portland that knows how to use butter. He knocked like he was assuming we didn't mean it, which made me like him more. We ate at my kitchen table with the window cracked open to let autumn in. He told us about his mother. She was a nurse's aide who could fix a cut with a Band-Aid and a joke, who raised him to believe that doing the right thing does not need a witness. She died a year ago from a disease that doesn't ask you what you still plan to do. He said he talks to her when he's cutting limes behind the bar. He said he likes to think she answered him that night when the room sharpened and he had to decide whether to risk being wrong. Do you ever feel guilty, Lena asked him, for not staying quiet and letting our life stay pretty? Marco shook his head. I feel sorry it had to be me, he said, but not guilty. I'd want someone to do it for my family. He took a slow breath. My mother used to say, we are each other's insurance policy. She meant community, the kind you can't buy. After he left, I stood at the sink and watched a gull hold steady against a stiffening wind. I thought about the time months earlier when I told Caleb I had a weird fog at 3 p.m, and he told me maybe I was dehydrated and made me tea. I thought about how grateful I was then for the kindness of someone who sees you as a person who deserves tea. I thought about how dangerous it is when kindness is a costume. Lena ended the engagement privately, without social media or fireworks. He texted her paragraphs about misunderstanding and pressure, and this isn't what it looks like. She didn't respond. He sent a single flower to my porch. I put it in water because water is cheap and plants don't deserve to be complicit. Then I placed the vase out of sight because I am done letting objects turn themselves into meaning I didn't approve. Detective Nair kept us updated without giving us anything she wasn't allowed to give. She is very good at only saying the part she can. She told us the DA was preparing a case that could hold up to a defense attorney with the kind of smile you learn in certain law schools. She told us they found enough on Caleb's devices to make a story the jury could follow. Drafts, lists, messages that said nothing and everything. Searches that would sound innocuous until the prosecutor read them in a row. She said they wouldn't offer a deal unless it kept other families safer. He took a plea 3 months later. He would serve time. He would be kept away from me by a piece of paper that matters when the right people enforce it. He would live in a place where the meals are the same for everyone. I was invited to speak at his sentencing, and I sat at my kitchen table the night before with a blank sheet of paper and the note from the restaurant beside me. I tried to write something that sounded like forgiveness. Then I remembered that forgiveness is not a performance, it's a private weather pattern that may or may not arrive. I wrote what I knew was true. I am 63. I like fennel and long walks on the Eastern Prom and people who tell the truth even when it puts them in rooms like this. I spent my life helping teenagers not doom themselves because of one bad day. I believe in mercy. I also believe in naming something for what it is. You wanted to control me. You wanted to control my daughter. You wanted to turn our future into a document that benefited you. I am not a document. I read it in court into a microphone that made my voice sound braver than I felt. He didn't look at me. Or maybe he did. I didn't offer him my gaze to notice. After, strangers stopped me in the hall to squeeze my hands and say they were sorry and angry and proud of me all at once. An older woman with a sweater the color of good sky told me her son-in-law has been helping with her passwords and she doesn't like the way the help feels. I told her to call someone she trusts. Call two someones, I said. Trust likes company. Life did not become a meadow after that. It did not become a mountain either. It became a place where I pay better attention and also let myself sleep at night. June comes over every Sunday. We walk by the harbor and pretend we know the names of boats. June calls just to tell me about something small and glorious, like a cashier who remembered her name unprompted. Marco sits at our table sometimes, and we tell the same story again on purpose so that repetition belongs to us. My house still felt a little haunted by cups of tea and afternoon fog, so I decided to move. Not far. A smaller place with a view of the water and a porch that feels like a good sentence. Moving is a practical way to tell your nervous system that it doesn't have to scan the same doorways forever. I donated things I didn't need. I kept the tart plate because it has become a symbol, but I stuck it in the back of the cabinet to remind it who is in charge. I started volunteering twice a week at the public library, which is where I've always gone when I need to remember people are mostly good. I help older patrons with their phones and passwords and the weird questions worlds ask when they move too fast. I learned the way to say, let's add a second layer of safety without scaring anyone. I learned to say, you don't owe anybody access to your life, even if they love you. In December, after the first snow, I found an envelope in my mailbox with my name written in a hand I recognized. It was from Caleb. I held it over the trash and then didn't. I have spent a life telling kids to finish hard things. I opened it. It was an apology without the middle part, the part where a person names specifically what they did without euphemism. It was full of words like pressure and spiral and thought we could build something and never meant to. It asked to meet for closure. I put the letter back in the envelope and slid it into a drawer with concert tickets from 30 years ago that made me smile to remember myself. I didn't write back. Closure is a door you install yourself. Sometimes other people help hold the hinge. Sometimes they don't get to come near it because they don't know how to use doors without breaking them. On New Year's Day, Lena and I walked in the frost that makes your breath visible. We stopped at a coffee truck parked by the trail. The barista said Happy New Year like he meant it. A gull landed and looked personally offended by land. Lena asked if I felt different from a year ago. Yes, I said. Not younger or older, just steadier. I told her I don't keep the kettle on if I'm not thirsty. I told her I signed a card to be my own agent if I ever need one. I told her I have a folder labeled Only with Evelyn that lives in a safe place and has the names of 3 people who can show up for me if life ever decides to be rude again. She laughed and said, "You labeled it like that?" "Yes," I said. "So there's no confusion about ownership." She took my arm. She said, "I'm glad you're here." I said, "I'm glad I'm here too," and meant it in every direction a sentence can point. In March, the library asked me to speak at a community night about protecting yourself without turning your heart into a locked box. I told my story. I did not linger on details that could teach the wrong lesson. I did linger on the part where a stranger at the bar took a risk for me, and the part where a detective did her job with kindness, and the part where my daughter believed me, even when it tore her to do so. Afterward, a man in his 70s with hands like old rope came up to me and said his neighbor had started insisting on helping with groceries, and he didn't like how his body felt about it. I said, "Then your body is correct. Close the door politely if you can, and firmly if you must." People keep asking me what I would have done if the bartender had been wrong, if I had refused dessert because my gut whispered, and the whisper was just anxiety wearing a costume. I tell them this: I would have gone home with the silly story and slept well. We are so afraid of embarrassment that we invite danger to sit down at our tables. Sometime in April, I dreamed about my guidance office. The room appeared exactly as it had the last week I worked there. Soft lamp, jars of fidget toys, a plant with one leaf thriving and the rest deciding, a poster that says, "You aren't your worst thought." In the dream, a senior I used to counsel walked in and sat down and said, "Miss M, I messed up." I waited for the part where we made a plan. Instead, I heard myself say, "You walked in and said it out loud. That's the part you were afraid of. That's the hardest part. You already did it." I woke up smiling, which is not normal for me. Dreams usually leave me with odd leftovers. This one felt like a good breakfast.
In May, Marcos texted to ask if I could send him my pie crust recipe. I told him it would only work if he promised to stop cutting the butter too small. He sent me a picture of butter cubes the size of dice and said, "Does this pass inspection?" I said yes, and then said, "Thank you." He wrote back, "For what?" I said, "For being the kind of person my mother would have told me to marry." He sent back a single laughing emoji, and then minutes later, "It's hard to know if you're joking." I told him I was and wasn't. He brought pie the next Sunday, and it was almost perfect, which felt like a proper metaphor. Summer returned. The harbor wore its bright face. I bought a small, ridiculous straw hat that made Lena threaten to stage an intervention. We walked the Eastern Prom and made up stories about strangers on blankets. We chose favorites without telling the strangers. We let the sun do the thing it does to bodies that need reminding. The trial never happened because the plea held. He went away for a length of time that means holidays will pass without his name on place cards at our table. That's enough. A year after the dinner at the Galleon, I went back. I sat at the bar this time. Marcos was there, of course, slicing citrus with the attention some people reserve for prayer. He looked up, smiled, the kind that starts in the eyes. He poured me club soda with lime because we've developed an understanding. He slid a napkin across the polished wood. I thanked him for the note he didn't leave that night, because silence is also a choice, and watching over a room of strangers is a vocation if you let it be. "How are you?" he asked, in the honest way people use when they aren't looking for the data point. They're looking for the truth. "I'm good," I said, and then adjusted, like a counselor coaching a kid out of a lie.
I'm better than good. I'm steady. That's new. He nodded. Steady is underrated, he said. I ordered the tart, even though it was the joke of all jokes. When it arrived, I laughed and took a picture and texted it to Lena with the caption, "I'm in charge of my desserts." She replied with 3 exclamation points and a heart she pretends she doesn't use. I took a bite that tasted like cinnamon and not fear. The room didn't tilt. The harbor kept breathing.
Sometimes when I'm on my porch and the light is doing that late day mercy it does, and the gulls are practicing for whatever they think is coming, I take out the original note and look at it. I don't frame it because I don't want my walls to become warnings. I just hold it and let it stand in for all the times we choose to speak when it would be easier to polish the glass and move on. I hope if you ever find yourself in a room where your body whispers and someone else's risk aligns with your fear, you move. Take the small action, trade the plate. Ask the quiet question, leave the note. I'm 63. I'm not who I was before that Friday, but I don't want to be. I'm a woman who believed a stranger and believed herself and lived. I'm a mother whose daughter learned the harder kind of love. I'm a sister with a scarf to tease. I'm a neighbor with a key under the right flower pot. I'm a retired counselor who still keeps tissues in her bag because crying on purpose is a skill. I'm tired sometimes and grateful and amused that my life has more plot than I wanted and less than some people get. I have learned to let an afternoon be simply an afternoon. If you were sitting across from me in my kitchen with fenugreek seeds popping in a pan because I've taken to cooking for people I love, and if you asked me what to do with your gut feeling, I would not give you a motivational speech. I would hand you a fork and I would say, trust it, eat what's yours, leave the rest. And then I would ask you to tell me in exact detail the moment the room changed shape. Because in my experience, naming that moment helps people survive it. The last thing I'll say is the first thing that saved me. 4 words in ink that will outlast both of us. Don't eat that. Trust me. If you need to, cross out eat and write whatever word your life requires. Don't sign that. Don't go there. Don't ignore this. Trust me. The world can be an unkind place. It is also full of Marcoses and Priyas and Lenas and Junes and doctors who keep their promises and therapists with tiny fountains and baristas who say Happy New Year and neighbors who will carry your couch and strangers who will hand you a napkin at the exact moment you realize you cannot carry grief with bare hands. That is, as far as I can tell, the point of living long enough to be grateful. You get to see how often people choose to keep you alive. You get to be one of them. So I sit here breathing with the harbor, steady in a way that is not flashy enough for television, and I say what I once said to teenagers and now say to myself as often as needed. Take one step in a better direction, then another. Keep the plate that is yours. Put your keys wherever you want. And if your gut whispers and your eyes see, move.